Now, the second part of your assignment for Unit 4 focuses upon the results, what comes after Abram has rescued Lot and his family members, as well as the various individuals that were taken captive and the goods that were hauled off by the Mesopotamian kings. As Abram returns to the land after this mighty victory, again, the text depicting Abram as a person who has the means, the wealth by which he can form an army, gather, finance an army, and pursue this group of kings from Mesopotamia. So these chapters present Abraham now in a new light. So Abraham has come back into the land. We have the promise of the land iterated here. We have an attack on the family of Abraham in Lot and company and that region, in which he will now be the rescuer, deliverer. So now Abram becomes a new faith follower, going after these foreign kings. And when after doing so, he of course comes back, as we're familiar, probably one of the most familiar passages in this portion of Genesis, with the return to encounter Melchizedek. So after that, he comes with all the goods and so forth, heading back to the land. He had pursued, after having pursued them up into the area between Dan and Damascus area, defeated those kings, comes back into the land, and will present a customary, again, most ancient cultures had a 10%, quote unquote, tithe means of giving offerings to their various deities. He comes and, of course, gives this customary 10% to this priest king, Melchizedek. And Melchizedek then pronounces blessing upon Abram by El Elyon, God Most High. And of course, this material also anticipates God's covenantal encounter with Abram in chapter 15 that we'll be doing next week in Unit 5. Melchizedek, of course, is a fascinating character. When we talk about various forms of characterization, so the characterization, we rank characters in any narrative as either full characters or less full characters, or shallow, flat characters. Different terms are used to describe these. Melchizedek is like somewhere in between. He shows up in the biblical narrative in a narrative sense out of nowhere. Abraham's coming into the land. No doubt there's somewhere in Abram's travels through the land knowledge of or even contact with this Melchizedek. But the Bible doesn't tell us any details about him. But Abram feels obliged to come back into the land. In Walke's text, it has an interesting emphasis upon the difference in the character between the king of Sodom and this king Melchizedek. The initial words he highlights with regard to the king of Sodom is that, he says, give me, give me what is due. Whereas on the other hand, Melchizedek is welcoming, and he is the rightful receiver of this form of blessing coming as a result. So there are lots of kind of subtle contrasts going on in the text between Abraham and Lot, between Abraham, of course, and these kings, Abraham and the king of Sodom, but also Melchizedek is distinguished from the other king in the text, that is the king of Sodom, in terms of character. And of course, it is then the lack of genealogy, the lack of other information about Melchizedek that is later brought back into biblical textual history. Psalm 110, where you have David writing of the future priest king, which we know is fulfilled in Jesus, but that the future king will come of the order of. Now, you have to understand the nature of what this order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek has no lineage, no ancestry mentioned. No doubt he had ancestors, but they're just not mentioned. But he doesn't continue in the story past this encounter of blessing. Again, he's there for the purpose of pronouncement of blessing, receiving this tithe of booty of war that Abram is bringing back. So again, throughout the history of interpretation, Melchizedek, from Psalm 110, historically speaking, before again the notation in Hebrews chapter 5, which builds on Psalm 110, in the Dead Sea Scroll material, we have a scroll that's often referred to or in abbreviation as 11Q Melchizedek. So this particular scroll was found in Cave 11, which is located about 3/4 of a mile north of the community residence site we often refer to as Cubit Qumran. But there, along with the Psalm scroll and numerous other scroll materials, there is a whole scroll that talks about Melchizedek. Melchizedek becomes in this interbiblical literature, this text dates to somewhere in the 1st century BC. Melchizedek is the leader of angelic armies. So during the intertestamental period, Melchizedek becomes angelic in the narratives and apocalyptic literature of this group living by the Dead Sea. So you have in the material Melchizedek, whose name of course means the king of righteousness or righteous king, is paired on the negative side with a king of the satanic armies. And he is called Melchir Rasha. Rasha is one of those hard words in Hebrew for rebellion, sinfulness, transgressions. So Melchir Rasha is the leader of the demonic armies of Satan, who is battling against Melchizedek, who with Michael and Gabriel are fighting against these satanic armies. So the angelic armies fighting against the satanic armies is envisioned in this apocalyptic end of times. So it's kind of parallel to the latter chapters of Daniel, where you have this heavenly battle going on while there are earthly battles of the forces of light, Qumran sectarians, faithful Jews, battling against the Gentile nations and the forces of darkness. So it's fascinating how Melchizedek gets translates into a new kind of visionary figure in this interbiblical period. And of course, throughout the history of interpretation in the early church, Melchizedek becomes a type of Jesus and various other things. And there are even those who thought Melchizedek was Jesus. But that's going a bit off the biblical scale there. So Melchizedek, fascinating character that who is rehearsed throughout history from the Old Testament to the New Testament and the early church. But in the biblical text, he is a source of God's continuing blessing upon Abram. And with that, in chapter 14, we are told, of course, that Abram is blessed by El Elyon, the Kana or Kane, the possessor of heaven and earth. And he says, "Blessed be also God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." So he gives that tithe portion and then gives the rest of it. One of the interesting aspects of this is Abram doesn't keep anything for himself. This belongs to the people from which it was taken. Abraham is now the faithful giver of all that God has enabled him to accumulate, but that was the possession of the people of this dark land down in the Jordan Valley, Sodom, Gomorrah, and that region. Abraham would not take even the short piece of leather that would make a sandal strap from all the goods that were recaptured from this. So only what food supply the men have eaten during this battle scene and the journey back, that's all we will keep. Nothing for himself. So Abraham becomes this faithful, giving individual in the text. Likewise, we are reminded that all that we have belongs to God, and we are simply stewards of what God has given us, and we need to be always faithful in rightly utilizing that which God has given us.